the second generation German. He co-created Mickey Mouse, and also Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. He's known as Walt Disney's oldest friend. They both met in Kansas City, Kansas in 1919, and they started working together in the Laugh-O-Gram Studios, and they were working on these things called Alice comedies, which was similar to a series by the Fleischer Studios known as Out of the Inkwell, where they have cartoon characters working in the real world. So they flipped it, and they have live action characters around in a cartoon world, kind of like Roger Rabbit. Around the time they were creating those cartoons, Walt Disney was like, hey, can you help me create a character? And Iwerks came up with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The thing is, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was owned by Universal, and they're like, nope, this isn't yours, so they need to come up with a new character, which turned out to be Mickey Mouse. Now, it's kind of hard to tell how much of a hand Iwerks had in it. Some people said, oh, he just drew him. But he animated the first 3 shorts virtually by himself. He also created Clarabelle Cow. He also created this thing called the optical printer, which allowed people to mix live action and animation. Mary Poppins actually won an Oscar for the special effects for that reason. He worked on a whole bunch of the rides. He worked on Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. He worked on It's a Small World and The Haunted Mansion. He created the multiplane camera. He figured out how to use Xerox in animation. And he was also a Renaissance man, so he'd pick up a hobby, he'd master it, and he'd drop it as soon as he did that. He did that with archery, bowling, etc. Is there anything else you guys would like?
I want to know, Rebecca, why do you think has anybody ever heard of Uwe Iwerks?
No.
Why do you think?
I think there are a few reasons why we don't know about him. One is, for a while, nobody even knew who Walt Disney was. So, they wouldn't know about the guy who was working with him, right? 2, he left Disney really early on, or around 1931, and then he came back a couple of decades later. He left because he's like, look, you gave me so much stuff to do, and nobody really knows who I am. I'm not going to work here. So he made his own studios. He made a couple of characters like Flip the Frog and Roy Walker, and they're cartoons distributed by MGM, and that didn't really work out. Also, Disney is such a huge name, and his biggest achievement is Mickey Mouse. So it's almost like not giving him any credit if you give the other person any credit at all. So, I mean, like, we might not think Walt Disney is worth anything, because immediately when you think Disney, you think of Mickey Mouse.
Right.
So, of course, they might want to blur the lines of what was going on behind the scenes.
So does that mean Walt Disney wasn't a nice person?
I think it depends on who you talk to. There was a rumor that he was anti-Semitic. I'm not so sure that is true. I think he was racist in the sense that everybody in the 20s and 30s was racist.
Okay.
Good point.
All right, I think that's pretty good. Thank you very much, Rebecca. All right, Hayes, you're up. Begin.
Hello, everybody. I'm doing my hidden figure as Tenzing Norgay. And Tenzing Norgay was a Nepalese mountain climber of the Sherpa tribe, born in May 1914 in eastern Nepal. A Sherpa is a member of the Himalayan people living on the borders of Nepal and Tibet, renowned for their skill in mountaineering. He was one of 13 children raised in Tamil Nepal in the Solo-Khumbu Valley near Mount Everest. In the early 1930s, he moved to India and participated in a number of British, French, and Swiss mountaineering expeditions between 1935 and 1952. In the spring of 1938, he went on a British expedition to Everest, led by Harold William Tillman, and reached higher than he ever had before. The British made 2 summit attempts on the expedition, but were forced to return because of deep snow and bad weather. Due to his efforts, in May 1939, Norgay was among the first group of Sherpas to receive the Tiger's Badge, a bronze medal awarded to Sherpas by the Himalayan Club in recognition of extraordinary accomplishments. After that expedition, Norgay was exhilarated and wanted to try again. However, for the next 9 years, World War II put his dreams and those of other mountaineers on hold. Instead, he worked as a ski instructor for the Indian Army. Later on, while on a different expedition, the lead Sherpa was injured and Norgay was promoted to take his place. Previously, the British had monopolized climbs on Everest, but in 1952, the Swiss were granted permission. During the first Swiss expedition, led by expert mountaineer Yves Dunant, Norgay formed a close friendship with Raymond Lambert, one of the Swiss climbers. Lambert and Norgay attempted to reach the summit together and made it to 8,611 meters, just 237 meters shy of their goal, before they were forced to turn around due to bad weather. In the spring of 1953, Norgay returned to Everest for the 7th time in his life and the 3rd time in the space of a year. During the expedition, which was led by Colonel John Hunt, Norgay and a New Zealand climber named Edmund Hillary, pictured here, discovered that they worked well as a team. On the morning of May 29, 1953, the two set out for the summit from the camp they had set up at 27,900 feet on the southeast ridge. Just below the summit, Norgay and Hillary relayed each other one at a time. They reached the summit at 11:30 a.m. Norgay spent 15 minutes at the top to take photographs, eat cake, leave an offering in the snow, and say a short prayer. After their peak at the summit, they became international celebrities. However, Hillary was eventually knighted, while Norgay only received a medal. And this is still a blow to his grandson, who said, "I think my grandfather should have been knighted. He was a member of the expedition, not just a Sherpa. They just gave him a bloody medal." And most of this information is on EBSCO.
Great.
All right, so tell me, Hayes, what do you think the reason is that Norgay didn't get a medal along with Sir Edmund Hillary? Or a knight?
No, he didn't get knighted.
He didn't get knighted.
I don't know. I feel like maybe it's just because he wasn't white. That was just my thinking. But
What do you guys think?
Yeah,
Yeah? Why do you think so, Austin?
in that time of that age.
And can anybody tell me what was the relationship between India and the British Empire at that time?
I believe. I believe India was still a colony of the British Empire at the time.
And so what does that relationship tell you?
Under the control.
And what must have the English thought of the Indians if they went in and colonized and did all that?
Inferior.
Hmm?
Maybe they thought they were inferior.
Right? Isn't that what happens when we colonize? We kind of put our mark on everything and kind of ignore what the native peoples kind of do. So it's not really surprising then, right, that this didn't happen. All right, cool. Thank you, Hayes. All right, who's next? Looks like Austin is. Green Weber.
Just now. Okay. We'll take care of it. Thank you.
How do you present it?
Sophie?
If you go, yes.
I don't use PowerPoint.
Great.
Oh,
It's not on the TV.
It's gone.
Sorry.
It's loading, I got a little blue circle.
You might want to stop it.
It's restarting the program because it crashed.
Austin broke the program. Let's all be clear.
All right, is that good?
There it is. Excellent.
Great. Oh, and before you start, maybe, Sophie, do you mind being kind of our designated person to go up and help? So whenever someone comes, you just go up. Don't even wait for them to ask for your help. Just go up with them and help them, because people are
Sophie's getting
nervous.
Extra credit.
Yeah. Thank you, Sophie. All right, let's give Austin a round of applause to give him some courage. All right.
All right, so I'm doing Wernher von Braun, and he is a Nazi scientist. So, okay, so before the war, he went to, when he was a little kid, his parents gave him a telescope, which really sparked his curiosity for the stars, and he always wanted to reach for the stars. And so he enrolled at the Berlin Institute of Technology in the late 20s, and studied there for a while. And then he enrolled at the University of Berlin to start studying physics, primarily rockets. They're starting to get there a little bit, but not quite. And then in 1934, he obtained a doctorate degree in physics from the University of Berlin. The same year, he led a group of 2 launches of liquid-fueled rockets more than 1.5 miles. And this is the beginning of rocket engines, so that's a big deal. So what he did was he was the head honcho on the Nazi super weapon, the V2, and so they were able to launch rockets from within Germany and send them over to Britain and cause a lot of damage. So about 1,500 of these things were fired at London, and around 7,250 people were killed single-handedly from these alone. And they were able to shoot 50 miles in the air and then travel 125 miles to the direction they wanted to go, which is, before you might be able to shoot a gun and hope you might hit something, but with these, they're like, okay, they know exactly where they hit them from 120 miles away. And so the V2 was the first supersonic rocket, and so you couldn't hear or see it coming. You just got hit. We had no idea it was coming. And so after when World War II was ended, the American government took them and it said, hey, we're not going to prosecute you for your war crimes if you help us make missiles. So that's exactly what he did. And so for 15 years, he worked with the U.S. Army and designed ballistic missiles. And it was around when the Cold War started and the whole kind of trying to beat Russia for the supremacy in space. President Eisenhower transferred him to the head of NASA. He was one of the first 3 people to found the National Aeronautics and Space Mission. So he was the head honcho. He's the guy who designed the Saturn V rocket, which is what we took to get to the moon. And we're excited. So why I think people don't really talk about it is because his invention killed 7,250 people. But hey, he got us to the moon before the Russians did. So.
All right, hold on a sec though. What do you guys think, morally speaking, that we took somebody that created, I mean, it's a scientific advancement, we gotta give them that, right? It never happened before. But what do you think our role, America's role, what do you think of that from a moral standpoint of not prosecuting this man for his war crimes and instead inviting him to work with us so we could beat the Russians into space? Gracia, what do you think about that? You don't know? Come on. What's the problem here? How many people been? Noah?
I admit and agree that it's not okay to just like let him go with all the bad stuff he did. But I feel like at the time, the importance of getting on the moon and all that science stuff, and honestly, just the war nuclear standpoint too, anything he could have helped with, like he might felt like he was in such danger. At the time, it was worth it, but now in hindsight,
So you're saying it might have shifted, the morality of it maybe shifted with time?
I think he should have still gotten in trouble somehow, but I feel like the importance of making advancements at the time was necessary for the safety of the country.
He didn't have any repercussions. He got to retire after NASA. He died happy. He died happy in a cute little town.
Maybe he could have gone
or
there.
something.
You sound bitter about that, Austin.
I mean, he pretty much killed 7,000 people, which is ridiculous.
And nothing happened. Because it brings up that question, right? In science, just because we can, should we? Right? Like what is really the line there? Think about how they're, growing sheep in little test tubes. And, I mean, just because we can, should we? And what kind of person do you want at the helm of science that can be used for questionable means?
There was a comment or two over here.
Yeah.
I also think that there was this thing going on that you can pardon someone who can contribute to the advancement of the nation, like even if he was originally against the nation, but then you're giving him a better deal of some sort, giving him an opportunity to kind of redeem himself for his conflict. I mean, that's another perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he kind of made up for that, but he can't really make up for killing other people handily, but then he kind of made up for it, all that, he made up for it by contributing to it and the competition between. So that's so good.
All right, that's certainly one way to look at it. Luke?
I can't remember, I'm trying to make this connection. I'm wondering if he's some kind of middleman in this, but his work was used by the Nazis, if you know what I mean?
No, he was the head of the V-2.
Yeah.
He was like the head honcho.
Yeah.
He used internment camps to build the rockets.
Okay, so
I forgot to mention that, but I think I might have put it in here, but I did not. Like, in order to make the rockets, like hundreds of thousands of internment camp people died as well. He was the head honcho of one of those gangs, and then he just used the slave labor to make the rockets to go kill more people. So it's really not cool.
It almost reminded me of, I can't remember his name, he was the guy who first created dynamite. How he was so appalled that his work was being used instead of mining for blowing people up. But I guess that's not exactly the connection you make, not a good idea.
Yeah?
That's actually why we have the Nobel Prize, because Alfred Nobel made it. He's like, I don't want to be remembered for making something that that could kill so many people.
And so instead they gave a prize in his name?
Yeah.
Interesting. I also heard that the Chinese invented it way
Well, it's gunpowder. He made the chemical formula for dynamite, which is like a different.
different. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Austin. Who's going next? Don't everybody jump up at once. All right. Oh, great, Katie, and then Sophie.
Thank you. I'm going to move over here because I don't think my sound quality is very good.
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
So my person is Thomas Clarkson. He was born in Wishbeck. I can't pronounce the last name, but it's called Cambridgeshire, something like that.
Cambridgeshire?
Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it. On March 28th of 1760, his dad was the headmaster of a school at a grammar school where he went to school, and he only died when he was 6 years old. After that, he continued going to school at St. John's College, and in 1785, he entered an essay. It's called "Is it lawful to make slaves of others against wills?" which brought up the point to like why slavery was wrong to him. Like not a lot of people talk about why slavery was wrong back then, and he kept looking into it. So he wanted to spend his time for the rest of his life trying to abolish slavery. So he traveled 35,000 miles trying to get information about why slavery was incorrect. And so I think he's a hidden figure because he's a hidden figure because he brought up slavery in Britain when it was such an uncommon thing, and he also brought up a lot of evidence to why slavery was incorrect, and he also went to France to stop slavery there too.
So hold on a second, Katie. What about him being an abolitionist makes him hidden?
Well, he wasn't getting credit for it. His partner, Wilberforce, he was the one that got most of the credit for it, so he was the one gathering all the information to why slavery was incorrect, and then he didn't get credit for it.
I see. So we don't know of Thomas Clarkson as an abolitionist. All right.
Not until now. And then, yeah, so why I think he was a hidden figure was because he was a white male trying to abolish slavery, and also someone else took the credit for the work that he did. And I think that's what he did.
All right. Any questions for Katie? Great. Thank you very much. Oh, so you go.
Yeah, I remember just a few years ago there was an anniversary of the abolition of slavery. Well, I guess it was 2004, not so recent, and because I think it was abolished in England in 1704.
No, I had it written.
Anyway, my point is, when that anniversary came around, we heard a lot about Wilberforce,
Yeah.
but I had never heard of this guy.
It was 1807. It was abolished.
1807. So the 200-year anniversary was 2007. We heard a lot about Wilberforce, and I didn't hear anything about your guy.
Yeah, I've never heard about Clarkson either. Interesting. All right, Sophie.
Okay, so I researched a woman named Margaret Hamilton who worked on the Apollo mission. She was one of the 400,000 people working there, and she was a software engineer. She first worked at MIT, and she ended up leading the software engineering division there. And it was kind of a new existing program and idea in general. And she actually coined the term software engineering. And she was extremely crucial to the Apollo mission. She she like was insistent on relentless testing, which was really vital to the landing. And her key career moment was on July 20th, 1969, the moon landing, when her software that she had written overrode a computer error, which would have actually forced the mission to abort. So her computer software allowed them to land safely. And she wasn't very recognized at the time. She actually did get the Medal of Freedom last year from President Obama. There she is. And this picture is of her, those are all of her handwritten notes beside her, so that's pretty cool.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and she actually went on to invent the first portable computer, so we have her to thank for that. And I think that she was hidden because she, at the time, women were not doing these technical jobs and high-powered technical jobs. And she was a working mother in the 60s, which was kind of frowned upon at that time. People would come up to her and say, I don't know how you do it, like, that's just crazy that you lead your kids all day, but she loved it, and she loved her kids too. And I think even today, technology is kind of like a boys' club job, and I think a lot of people would be surprised that the founder of software engineering was a woman.
Right.
Has anybody ever heard of Margaret Hamilton?
I heard of her, but only because I was doing research on Hidden Figures. And one thing that I thought was cool, and you might know this anecdote better than I do, her kid was kind of hanging out with her at the place and moved a lever that she shouldn't have. And it caused her to realize, I need to create a program in case that happens. And the men all said, oh, that'll never happen. No one would ever push that lever that way and that, And she said, well, just in case it happens. Am I telling the story right? And then it did happen. And so it was kind of cool that because she was a mother and she saw, humans make mistakes. My kid was playing. So I felt like it's not just that she was a woman, but that the aspects of her being a woman kind of saved people's lives.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not saying it very well.
That's actually a really good thing, right? To have seen the kid, because humans make mistakes, as we all know. Right? All right, anybody have any questions for Soph?
Is she still alive?
Yes.
I think she is still.
Yeah, she just got the medal.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
All right, thank you, Sophie. Very interesting. Who's next? Oh, Danny's getting up. Okay.
All right. And it's very appropriate that Sophie's our tech support, given the person you just presented us with. Oh, I told Colleen Nehall she wanted to bring her class for this presentation. She didn't think she could bring the whole, for the whole period. She might drop into the last 20 minutes. I told her just set up some chairs in the back.
We're good.
So if you see a bunch of students coming in, they're like a speech class, so they're studying speech.
So don't feel any pressure.
No pressure.
Don't worry.
It's so great to have you all here. You got it. Here I come. Okay.
Hydrate, my friend, hydrate.
So doing my hidden figures on not just one person, but the Tuskegee Airmen. How many of you guys know or have heard of the Tuskegee Airmen? Like, okay, so like hardly anyone. They, so the Tuskegee Airmen, they were also known as Red Tails, and they were they started in 1941, so there was segregation and Jim Crow laws still really prevalent, and there was also what they called like black political agitation. And so before the Red Tails came in, there was absolutely no black people in the Air Force in the U.S. It wasn't segregated, but that's just because they wouldn't admit any black people. So because of the political angst and people fighting for equal rights, they decided to have a segregated Air Force, and that was the Red Tails. They're basically, the Air Force wanted the Red Tails to fail, and basically to make sure that no change would happen as far as civil rights went. So they gave them board planes that had lots of mechanical issues, and they were also supposed to go in kind of as bait. They were supposed to go in and find out whether the people, whether they were going to fight, or whether they were in the presence of friends or of enemies. And so they had a really tough time, but they were fighting not only fascism abroad, but racism at home. So they had failure, just like was not an option for Red Tails. They ended up succeeding, and they did an amazing, they fought super hard, they did an amazing job, and that led to, their success led to desegregation in the Air Force, as well as the help with black political leaders helping desegregate the Air Force. So yeah, that's who they are. And then, so it wasn't until about like 50 years after the war that things were published about the Tuskegee Airmen. There's been several autobiographies about Tuskegee Airmen, but there was one movie, an HBO film called The Tuskegee Airmen in 1995, and then Red Tails in 2012. And Red Tails would not be backed by Hollywood because there were too many black people in the film. And so George Lucas created the film, phenomenal film, you guys should all watch it, and he backed the production himself. So I believe that they are a hidden figure because they proved the white guys wrong. And yeah, and lots of lives were lost, so it was a pretty disgusting thing that they were given these planes, and you know, they still succeeded when they were given all these disadvantages, and so, yeah.
Tell me, why red tails? What's the red signify, do you know?
I actually don't know the red.
They were supposed to be. Yeah, thanks.
It was to like have them stand out.
So the enemy would find them easier?
Yeah, so
Okay,
shoot them.
yeah.
Okay, charming.
Did you want us to add to that?
Nope.
Nope, okay.
Interesting, Luke.
Do you know if their planes were actually armed, or if they just gave them unarmed planes?
Yeah, I mean, they were armed. They were, so they were like navigators, they were bombers, and yeah, so they were fighter planes, bombers and navigators.
Because I know a lot of the military, their trainer planes usually had like red or orange tips on the noses and tails to signify that that was a trainer plane. So I wonder if they just gave them trainer planes to fly.
No, I know that some of them like this long, but I don't know, they weren't good planes. They were
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Dave. Who's next? Jason? All right, Seth.
Yay.
Saved by the bell. Okay.
I'm really enjoying these, so thank you. And I'm learning a lot.
Okay, so this is not a single person. There were so many people involved in my situation, and it was very difficult to choose like one because everyone was like so notable and so disgusting, and so it's the whole premise. So I think the premise behind these people is also unknown because California, you know, we have this idea that California is like known to be the most progressive liberal state, and so the idea that we have this history of, eugenics and racial cleansing is generally very unknown. We actually, in between the early 1900s into the late 1950s, forcibly sterilized about 20,000 people, which was happening across the US, but California was the epicenter. We had headquarters for both the Human Betterment Foundation and the American Society of Eugenics, and the idea was that we had a superior race, which is of course Nordic and Aryan, so it's blonde blue-eyed, but the Aryan race is also believed to be stronger, smarter, and more capable, and this is all like through genetics, it's in your blood, it's not just like who you are as a person, which is backed actually by a man who worked at Stanford. He was the founder of the IQ test, and he was also very involved in genetic studies of intelligence and the idea that regardless of language barrier, that immigrants were still considered to be just like less intelligent, less capable overall. So the idea that they were promoting was that you only want fit individuals in your society, and so they had to limit the reproductive capabilities of people who were considered unfit, which would be minorities, poor people, and the mentally unwell. And they made this palatable to our public by saying that it was saving money on welfare. So they were limiting the number of children that a woman on welfare could have and get support for. They were very involved in like marriage restrictions as well. We were still very segregated at the time. And then they were coercing like drug addicted women into getting sterilized and making sterilization a part of probation terms for criminals. So it was kind of across everywhere, and the people who were involved were like very notable, powerful, influential figures. So we had like the founding president of Stanford, who was also the president of the World Peace Foundation. And so that's what he's most known for as a person, obviously. People think that he was just very, for lack of a better word, peaceful. But the idea behind that for him was that war removes the strongest men from the gene pool. And he wrote this whole thing about like the blood of a nation and how your blood determines like how decent of a person you are. But like the first ever chairman for Sacramento State was also the founder of the Eugenics Society in Northern California. The creator of the IQ test was also the chair of the psychology department at Stanford. And we had a winner of a Nobel Prize for physics who discovered the charge of the electron, who was also, he was the director of physics at Caltech, and he was a member of the Human Betterment Foundation and all of that. So it's just people across the board. So when World War II, everything was happening with that, Germany actually sent officials to California to study how we were doing this. It was noted in the Mein Kampf. Hitler references the US as his model for ethnic cleansing and creating this better society. We had the founder of the Eugenics Society in Northern California visited Germany and came back and bragged about how we were inspiring Hitler and inspiring a better world. And then after World War II, when the Germans were tried for genocide, they tried to cite California statutes in their defense and lost anything. And so then, of course, genocide was frowned upon and California stopped doing it about 10 years ago.
Fascinating. Have you ever heard about any of this? You know, you didn't realize?
I had no idea it was this widespread.
Well, I mean, think about it, that Hitler sent some of his top people over here to learn from people in California about how to ethnically cleanse a population. Is that what you think of as California?
No.
I saw you over there, Austin. You're like, what? It does seem kind of totally against what we the image we have of our state, right? And the people that Stephanie was mentioning, those were all the leaders in the state. Bigwigs at IBM were also involved with the eugenics and ethnic cleansing and the Society for Betterment, the betterment of society. So we're not as clean-handed as we would like to think, I guess, is the lesson here. Any guesses as to why we don't talk about this? Why isn't it in our history books? Yeah. What do you think, Rebecca?
It's much harder to make World War II black and white if we're doing some of the same things the Nazis are doing. Also, it's completely against our modern image.
Super interesting. When I first heard about this was, like, there was some anniversary of something, and there was a big story in the Chronicle, and probably 15 years ago, whenever it was, and I was like, no, this can't be true. I had to go right onto the computer and start researching this stuff because I couldn't believe that this was the case. I'd never heard about it in a history book or anything. But there you have it. California was leading the nation in ethnic cleansing, and we taught the Nazis how to do it. So yay for us. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, who's going to go next? I'll go. All right, go Karen.
Hey, thank you. And a few others. Well, at first I didn't want to do villains. As you know, I was kind of hesitant, but I'm so glad we did, because I feel like it's kind of a healing process to hear about this, these bad chapters in our history. Yeah.
It's important to know.
It's so important to know.
So she's losing extra credit with her technical skills here.
There we go. Thank you.
So today I'm going to talk about Comandante Ramona. So before I start, you have to know a little bit more background. So the Zapatistas, who they are, they're known as the Zapatistas Army of National Liberation, the ECLL, and Ejército Zapatista Liberación Nacional. So they were a revolutionary political and military group in Chiapas, in southern state of Mexico. Their goal was to protect indigenous people's rights. Many of the economic laws didn't benefit many of the indigenous people, and most of the indigenous people in Mexico didn't speak Spanish, so they couldn't really fight against it until Comandante Ramona came along. So in 1993, Comandante Ramona led an army of thousands of indigenous women to create women revolutionary rights. She was voted through the people to be the commander. She fought to protect women's rights. She wanted to stop violence towards women, remove arranged marriages, education for indigenous women, and many more. I had a video, but I forgot many people don't speak Spanish. So if you guys want to see it, just let me know. So according to an article that I have, the woman was Comandante Ramona, one of the Revolutionary Committee of Tonantzin and Quetzaltal, Mayan Indians. He said the real leaders of the guerrilla group. She was also known as the petite warrior because she was really small. She passed away January 6th of 2008 due to kidney disease. And there's more people and the people she led. As you can see, she's really small. And she was known for her famous quotes. So I'm not a good translator, but I'll say as much as I can. She said, "We want Mexico to come to realize that we are humans, to respect us, and to know we have dignity, Mexico, where we deserve to be. Am I right?
If I could see it, I could turn it up. I can't see it from here, so. My eyes
And
are
to just like our hope is that one day we can change our situation and they can treat women with respect and justice and democracy.
Very nice. So Karen, tell me if I'm curious. When you said that she led an army of Indigenous women to fight,
Yeah.
guns, war, skirmishes.
Well, in the beginning they had guns and stuff, but later on they led to more peaceful actions. So they didn't really carry guns. The men did though.
Interesting. Have you guys ever heard of an Indigenous uprising in Mexico?
Never.
Why do you think we don't hear about these things? I mean, it wasn't that long ago, right? Why do we not get it on CNN or Fox News or ABC News?
This is fake news.
Any thoughts? No? What do you think, Taylor? Why do you think we didn't know about this? Why wasn't it on our newscasts?
Because you're not like white or something.
Maybe. I think that I was kind of thinking about the bias that we have in our news, right? You know, I've talked to you about like watching other news channels and stuff, but one of the things I didn't know there was an Indigenous uprising in Mexico. I don't think I've ever heard about it. And I watch a lot of news. I read a lot of newspapers. So the question is, why is it just not important to us? Do we just not care?
I think it depends what news channel you're watching.
The what, honey?
What news channel you're watching. Because so like on like, you know, there's certain people who watch CNN and Fox and then there's others like NBC, like my parents, yeah, ABC on just like the different stories they're gonna tell on each channel.
And I'm glad that you said Univision and Telemundo, because that actually would have more of a lens on that, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you very much, Jen. Who's jumping up next? Go,
Great,
Lisa, go.
terrific. Terrific, terrific.
Good morning, everyone. My hidden figure is Grace Hopper. Grace Hopper is a computer programmer, a mathematics teacher, and she was also at the U.S. Navy Reserve. One of the things that Grace Hopper did was she invented the first compiler-related tool, which is a software that translates instructions written in programming language into machine language so that they can be read and understood by a computer. And the reason why I think Grace Hopper is hidden is because at that time in the 1940s, many women were not allowed to work and they were supposed to stay home taking care of their family members. But since Grace Hopper didn't do that and instead did works that many men would do at that time, maybe that's why she wasn't paid that much attention to and wasn't recognized very much.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Does anybody, what does it mean to change programming language into machine language? Does anybody know? Do you know, Paula?
A little bit of an idea of it. It's to like, you have this, it's a software that reads the code, written into code, oh yeah. It reads the code, decodes it for the machine so that the computer will understand.
Oh, I see.
It's like a binary code of zeros and ones.
What's that,
It's
Alyssa?
a binary code of zeros and ones that the machine reads.
I'll take your word for that. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much, Lisa.
Is Grace Hopper still alive?
As the 15th Amendment was ratified a few years earlier than this. And then a big figure in the 1800s, especially late 1800s, were women's rights in racial and sexuality equality movements. And then Frederick Douglass was her VP nominee. And this was the first time an African American or woman was a high political office candidate. And then she was also an activist for women's rights and labor reforms. She was an advocate of being able to freely love who you choose. And she wanted freedom to marry, divorce, and bear children without government interference. And she also had many other careers besides being a presidential candidate. She was, like I said, a women's rights activist, but she was also a stockbroker. So her and her sister, her name was Penny Blackwood, became the first female stockbrokers. And in 1870, she opened a firm on Wall Street. Pretty interesting. And then she also, her and her sister, opened a newspaper. She was a newspaper editor. So on May 14th, 1870, they used the money that they made from the brokerage and founded this newspaper.
Very cool. Has anybody ever heard of her before? Imagine that in 1872 there was a woman and a black man on the presidential ticket. Right? You'd think we would have heard of something like that, especially in this last election when we had our first woman possible, right? But anybody know if anybody's run before? Any women have run before Hillary Clinton? No? Ever heard of Geraldine Ferraro? No? She ran as a VP. All right. Cool. Very interesting, Taylor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go Noah.
All right. Taylor, the battery went dead right as you started, so I only got about half of it. Sorry. And it was very shaky. You'll be sick to your stomach. Motion sickness. Come on.
I like it.
Okay, so I did mine on Hercules Mulligan. He was born in Ireland in 1740 and moved to the United States, the colonies at the age of 6 years old. And he grew up in New York. And in 1774, he opened a clothing emporium and became a tailor to the wealthy in New York City. And at the time, he also married the niece of the Admiral of the Royal British Navy, but he didn't have any necessary ties to the British, and he catered to high-ranking British military officers, but had no allegiance despite his wife's and his customers, including he was a member of the Sons of Liberty, a member of the New York
City Committee of Correspondence, and he also encountered and became friends with Alexander Hamilton. And it became such good friends that they're actually now barely next to each other in New York City. But he had a profound, this isn't why he's a hidden figure, it's just an added detail, but he became like a mentor to Alexander Hamilton, who became one of our founding fathers, which is another avenue in which he could be a hidden figure. But the main thing he did was that he became a spy for General George Washington, because with a bunch of British military officers as your customers, you can start to pick up some intel and get some stuff from them. One of the main things he did was when you bring your clothes to a tailor, you have to tell him when you need them by. So when a lot of people would come, bring him their red coats and tell him, I need them by this date, he would know that this platoon was moving somewhere at that time. So he would send, he had a slave, but he was also an abolitionist, but he had a slave. He would send his slave Cato, who also I think should get some credit, to George Washington and let him know, this military unit is moving at this time. You should know that so you can plan around it. In addition to that, he also saved the life of George Washington twice. The first time was one of the highest ranking military officers that he served contacted him late one night and urgently needed his coat repaired and needed it the next day. And he questioned why do you need it by that day, and for whatever reason he told him, I'm going on a special mission to capture General George Washington. So he immediately sent his slave Cato to tell George Washington, and he was able to escape and avoid the attack, which in turn saved George Washington's life, possibly. The second time was that he learned that General Sir Henry Clinton of the British Army found out that George Washington was moving to Rhode Island via the Connecticut coast, and they were sending about 300 ships in the water to attack and kill or capture General George Washington. He found that out again, sent word, and they were able to reroute and not get attacked. And so I think that makes him a hidden figure, because without that, George Washington, who became, or was one of the leading generals in our army, but also became the first president of the United States and one of our founding fathers, he essentially saved his life twice. So had he not done that, had he not become a tailor, had he not become a spy, George Washington could have died, and for all we know, it could have altered where we are today. America, or the United States, could have never become a thing. We could have never won the war. Anything could have happened differently. And this is all from the official CIA website.
Let me ask you a question. With that name, why didn't they use him? Hercules Mulligan, right? Do you think, tell me, yeah.
Because he catered to the British and lived in like a British community, so a lot of people thought he was still in support of the British government. And I also forgot to mention that he's the reason that Alexander Hamilton became a patriot, because Alexander Hamilton used to support the British Empire. And it wasn't until he became friends with Hercules Mulligan that he didn't realize their flaws and became a patriot. But it was because of that concept that other people thought he supported the British that he, I don't think, was written down in history books. And it actually wasn't until after the war that George Washington went to visit him in New York to thank him for everything that people started to realize, oh, he's not what we thought he was.
So he was definitely hidden at the time he was doing this work as well.
Yeah.
All right, very cool, Noah. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so you need to, did you send it to my work email or my Gmail?
I sent the one that you showed today.
Okay.
Hold on, relax.
I think we'll see. I'll do my best.
Jessica, will you jump up after the form, please? Yeah, thank you.
This is going to take a minute. So, hey, if you guys want to get up and stretch.
Isn't that open? If you want to be next. No. Since we got it open, that way we don't have to wait.
Sit around here quietly and not have to get up there at all.
There it is. Sorry. Oh, I remember. You showed me the doors and
No, you explain that.
sorry about that. Open with, okay, let's just,
You stretched enough for everyone? Okay, good.
just take a break.
Of course. Have a seat, honey.
Maybe it's because maybe I didn't keep it by accident and now I'm having trouble. Yeah. Well, you know what? That's not the end of the world. At least we can see a nice picture of them. Yeah. Is that right? It's just not,
Yes.
well, you know what? Let's just go for it. I know, I'll just go. How can it see? What I do. Now, see if it's no. Sorry. Let's just go and then maybe we'll get down. We'll just do it without.
Okay, you guys, my apologies, I can't get it open, so we're just going to give Luke let's give him a round of applause to encourage him. All
Alright, so I guess I'm here to tell you a little bit about Dory Miller. So during World War II, Dory Miller was a mess attendant on the battleship West Virginia, the U.S. base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Now, he was on board the vessel during, actually, the Pearl Harbor attack by Japanese forces on December 7th, 1941. So in this era, African American troops would usually not be allowed to use firearms. They were normally used as non-combatant roles, such as sanitation workers, cooks, manual laborers. However, Dory went above and beyond the call of duty when the battleship West Virginia was struck by a Japanese torpedo. Dory Miller assisted in carrying injured troops to safer areas while the battleship was being dive bombed, actively, even attending to his dying ship's captain. Although Miller was in a non-combatant role, he took control of a .50 caliber anti-air gun, which he had no training in how to use and had never fired before. Miller fired the gun until he ran out of ammunition, reportedly downing between 3 and 6 Japanese aircraft. All the while, the West Virginia was slowly sinking into the harbor. He was only mentioned vaguely in the paper, stating a Negro messman had behaved heroically, until the editors of a popular African-American newspaper, the Pittsburgh Courier, demanded that it be found out who he was. This led Miller to gain his Navy Cross for his courage and promoted the prestigious rank of messman attendant first class, which I guess is very prestigious for an African-American troop at the time. On November 24th, 1944, Miller was killed while stationed on the USS Liscombe. Can I pronounce that? The ship was hit by a Japanese torpedo from a submarine. Dory's family did not hear about his death until about 2 years after he had actually passed away. Today, the National Black Veterans Association believes that Dory Miller should be awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously, or how you pronounce it?
Posthumously.
Posthumously. I thought that was a good word to use.
Yeah.
In 2010, he was even added to a line of postal stamps, including famous sailors, which I included a picture of, but it's not working for here. He even actually, in 2014, near Pearl Harbor, he now has a park named after him. And that's a more newer coming events. That's it what I got for that. Any questions?
Cool. Any questions for this? Are you surprised that he reached the prestigious rank of first-class messman? You guys know what a messman is?
Kitchen duty.
Kitchen duty. Woo! Woo! Very nice. Thank you. All right, Jessica.
Great. All right.
Alrighty, Jessica.
Jessica.
Okay, so the person I researched is Rosalind Elsie Brown. Okay, so she was born on July 25th, 1920 in London, England, and died on April 16, 1955 at the age of 37. Okay, so she, so her work was crucial for the discovery of the double helix, and she was the one who took an X-ray of DNA, in which you guys can see it right there. And that photograph is now it's well known as photograph 51, but many people will argue that it wasn't Franklin's work, but rather someone else's. And in 1962, Crick and Watson won a Nobel Prize for the discovery of the double helix, and they didn't mention Franklin. And Franklin died of ovary cancer, and after 4 years they were awarded, and she didn't even get any credit for her work. And I think she was a hidden figure because of sexism. Back in those days, many women were thought to be housemaids, and they shouldn't be working at laboratories or be teaching or stuff like that, and therefore she didn't get credit.
Interesting. Tell me, did she publish about?
Yeah, she did. It took her about a year to finish investigating the double helix and her calculation. But at the same time, Craig and Watson also finished doing the same thing, and they published the same paper about the same time that they. So they first published the paper, and then after that they published Franklin's paper, saying that she was just proving the Craig and Watson's theory, but it didn't really get right.
So the story goes that even though she found it first, when her paper was published, it was simply to prove Watson.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, charming. Excellent. What do we think about that, ladies and gentlemen? What?
Some classic stuff that is went down.
Classic stuff that went down. I'll buy that. Yeah, Paula.
Actually, I also had she's also kind of one of my hidden figures too. The story was that Maurice Wilkins was her supervisor in the lab at Cambridge, at King's College, where she worked. And he had a very discriminatory kind of, the men scientists, basically you have James Watson and Maurice Wilkins were kind of like pretty much did not think of her as heading her own research, which she was doing. She was actually heading her own research on DNA structure and all that, and she was using X-ray crystallography or X-ray diffusion. The thing about that is that since she is a woman, she is not supposed to be superior in that sense. So they mistook her for being a research assistant, a lab assistant instead. And so that's also partially why the credit didn't really go to her, but rather to Francis Crick, James Watson, and Maurice Wilkins.
Ladies, what do we think about that? We're all okay with that? Yeah?
No, it's despicable.
It's despicable. All right, well, thank you very much, Jessica.
There's a parallel to Hidden Figures if you think about, there's a famous scene in the movie. How many people have seen the movie, Hidden Figures? Do you remember the scene where, can't remember which of the women it was, she keeps typing her name on the cover of the report and they keep taking it off. But yeah, so she's not getting the credit because she's not, I guess she's not an engineer, she's a mathematician.
Go ahead,
Well, I'm Marin, and how many people here know who Roy Cohn is?
Roy Cohn.
Roy Cohn. All right, good. Well, Roy Cohn was an American lawyer. He was born February 20th, 1927, and he was known for his partake in the Rosenberg trials, which was basically these two people, the Rosenbergs, who were allegedly, or they were convicted of spying on the Manhattan Project, which is basically like how the U.S., like we're doing all their tests to like build a nuclear device to end the war. Sorry. So yeah, basically he gave himself credit for ultimately getting them found guilty and their execution also. That's like what, like, if you do know him, like that's what like people mostly know him for, but he has a dark past, or not dark past, but like he's done some pretty messed up things. So Roy Cohn was a homosexual that was homophobic, and also a Jew who was anti-Semitic. So as you can see, he's pretty messed up in the head. So basically, Roy Cohn was best friends, or he grew to befriend Senator Joseph McCarthy, and I saw Meg's head come back. So basically, you guys know how during the Red Scare, which is the fear of like communism taking over the United States, well, there was also another scare going on. It was called the Lavender Scare, and basically what this was is Roy Cohn and Senator Joseph McCarthy were trying to convince President Dwight D. Eisenhower to fire all gays in the United States government, and they were saying that because they thought gays were communist sympathizers. So eventually this did end up happening in 1951. No. I can't remember the date, but they ended up getting over 5,000 people fired, homosexuals fired from the United States government. As you can, that's like, I don't know, that just like is so messed up to me personally, because I feel everybody is able to do anything they want, and like there's nothing wrong with that. But also in 1973, Roy got the case to defend fellow New Yorker Donald Trump, who was.
Notice how he looks right at me.
Trump was being accused by the Justice Department for violating the Fair Housing Act in his operation of 39 buildings in Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island. Basically,
the government was accusing Trump of quoting different rental terms and conditions to African Americans, and also making false no vacancy claims to African Americans. So basically, like, he just didn't want to sell any of his property to any African Americans, and if he did, he would tend to make like the rent way more expensive than what it would be for a white person. So Cohn defended Trump by making a $100 million countersuit against the United States government for the accusations being baseless. Obviously that didn't work out. The countersuit did not succeed. And, but Trump never, as you know, he doesn't like to believe he's wrong or anything, so Trump never really took the blame or found, like, just pleaded his guilt. Also, the last thing that Cohn did was he walked in 1975, he was accused of walking into a hospital room of multimillionaire Louis Rosenthal. He was this giant, he owned like this giant corporation, and basically when he was in a coma, Rosenthal was in a coma, Cohn forced a pen into his hand to basically give him and Rosenthal's granddaughter, Kathy Frank, all of his beneficiaries, so like all of his money from his will. But then they eventually found out about that, and basically his career and everything just started going downhill. And he actually contracted AIDS, but he tried to keep it out of the public eye because he was gay, but he was obviously homophobic, so he didn't want people knowing he was gay. So he kept it out of the eye, and he was getting these like these what's the word? Tests, like these new drugs for AIDS. Yeah. And these new drugs for AIDS, and but eventually he died at the age of 59, and his goal was to be completely broke and owing millions to the IRS, which he did end up doing.
Well, first of all, I've never heard of the lavender scare. Has anybody else? You have, Rebecca. Where have you heard that from?
I don't remember how I looked that up. I think I might have been looking up Brian Epstein, who's the manager of the Beatles, and he was gay, and it was just doing completely wrong.
Okay, all right. You went down the rabbit hole.
Well, I'm gay. I didn't know it as that term, but obviously you folks probably know that just being gay was against the law. I know a guy in his 80s who, he can tell stories about, you know, he couldn't even live with his partner of 37 years because if someone saw them living together, they'd figure out they were gay. So they lived in separate houses. So there's a lot of, I mean, one advantage of gay liberation is that you can't blackmail someone now for being gay. It's like, I just say, like, imagine me 50 years ago working at College of Marin. I could have lost my job. Did you hear the librarian's gay? That I'd be out the door. And now it's like I can just say it. And so that's, but yeah, this idea of a gay man being anti-gay or a Jewish person being anti-Semitic, I think we need to focus on that. I'm so glad you brought that up because there's actually a word for internalized homophobia is when you're gay and you hate being gay.
You hate yourself.
You hate yourself. It's self-loathing because you've gotten the message so many times. And I venture every gay person has some of that.
Sure.
I know I do.
Sure.
You know, it's that self-loathing because you get sent the message so many times in your life that being gay is bad. So you start to believe it. So I'm so glad you brought him up.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you. We're going to go up as Kamran got up, so why don't you go for it, Edwin?
I want to read more about the lavender scare.
There's a couple of things I'm going to have.
I know.
I got to see the movie Red Tails. I don't have any papers this weekend because I pushed your papers on Tuesday.
Thank
so
you.
I might watch the movie.
Okay.
Nice try.
All right, Edwin. Let's give Edwin a round of applause. Give him some courage.
I'm going to talk about a team, and then I'm talking about someone in particular. But I'm going to talk about the girls soccer team, the U.S. I'm talking about it because, they've won the World Cup, which is the equivalent to the Men's World Cup, 3 times. You know how crazy that is? 3 times. So they won it in 1991, they won it in 99, and recently they just won it in 2015. They won the Olympics 4 times, one in 1996, one in 2004, the other one in 2008, and the other one in 2012. Okay, so they've been #1 since 2008, and they recently just dropped, but then they came back right back to second place, and then took them like some months to go back to #1. So you can see how strong they really are. And the hidden figure that I'm really talking about is Abby Wambach. She won the gold medal in 2004 and 2012. She led the U.S. to win the World Cup in 2015. She won FIFA Player of the Year, which is the same thing, equivalent to like Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi, Balón de Oro. But the thing is here that they don't get credit for it, all right? But we don't really know all about this, because soccer is a man-run sport. You wouldn't put Cristiano and Abby Wambach together because that's not how the world sees it. The U.S. itself, the soccer team, the U.S. soccer team didn't even make it to the World Cup this year, and they didn't qualify this year, and they still get paid more than the women, and they still get they just get better. They get more advertised and everything, and the women are like over there when I feel like it should be switched around because we have a great team in our very own country. So yeah.
Super interesting. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that it's partially also because a cultural reason why? What do you think, Danny? I saw you nod your head there.
Well, I think it's not just soccer, it's literally every single sport, like women's basketball, everything, we're not acknowledged. It's definitely maybe because men are out there doing things stereotypically, and women are people who are supposed to stay home and not be competitive and stuff.
In the 21st century, isn't that annoying? Yeah? Go ahead.
I think part of it, at least for basketball, is the entertainment factor, because at least just dunking is part of it.
Everyone leans back in case anybody.
It's kind of like a big part of basketball. People are in the NBA because they're tall and dope.
Okay.
But I don't think it's entertainment though.
Karen?
I don't think it's based on.
Hold on, guys. Karen's got the floor.
I don't think it's based on. I don't think it's based on entertainment because the women's soccer are. My opinion, when I see the boys play, they're so dramatic and fall and start crying. But the women's soccer team, they can be bleeding and stuff. Because I've watched most of their games. They're bleeding, almost breaking, and they continue on playing.
I was about to say that they're very entertaining. If you think about it, they're very fast. They're very strong. They play the game really well, and
Yeah, interesting. All right, Alexis and then Cam.
So I watch both women and men, and every time I see a woman play, they play so much better than the guys. I'd rather watch the women's soccer more than the guys.
Interesting.
They're way much better.
And they're doing so much better.
Yeah.
Cam and then Emily.
Back to what you're saying with NBA, because they don't, you see more excitement. Yeah, but when it comes to girl and guy soccer, I don't watch guy soccer because you won't see that much goals. It takes forever or no goals at all throughout that game. The girls, you see at least 2 goals a game. And I'm like, when you see goals, you're excited. You always hear people screaming in the canal. You can hear the goals. You don't need to watch TV to know who scored. You just hear that in the canal. People start screaming. It's just, I think it's more exciting to watch the girls soccer than it is to watch the guys.
Nice. Katie?
I actually wrote a paper about this not long ago, my junior year in high school about Title IX, and a lot of people said that a lot of the reasons why men are more advertised is just because of what you guys are saying, it's just more entertaining or whatever. But all of the times, it's just the lack of like us being interested in it. I feel like a lot of us, even women, like for me, like I paid a lot more attention to the NBA than the WNBA, and then until now, like I was like, yeah, you know, this is something we should all start paying attention to. But women do dunk. I can give you many facts about that. Actually, my team, I play basketball here, so my teammate's about to be, she's like damn near close to dunking, so like to watch that, we play next week.
Well, then maybe we should all go see a little women's basketball, right? And also, yeah, Emily, that's right.
I feel like being a girl, I played on a baseball team, all guys. I was head captain of my boys lacrosse team. Didn't play girls, played boys. Played football with boys. I don't feel like, you know, separating us really makes that big of a difference. I was just as good. All the boys were mad because, oh, there's a girl, she's our team captain, she's a starter. That's not right. You know, I am just, like, any girl can be just as good as a guy, whether they're short, tall, you know, it doesn't really matter because I'm not very tall, okay? I'm hardly 5 feet tall. I might even be 4'11" and consider myself 5 feet. But
I think we just had our deepest, darkest secret.
But I mean, that never really stopped me. Like, you know, even playing basketball on a girls' team, like, not, like, I was under the hoop fighting with all these girls who were tall. Like, girls can be just as aggressive as guys. And growing up with brothers and playing the sports with guys, they were so dramatic. So dramatic. I think they're better, like, worse girls than we are when we play sports.
Well, I would urge you not to say that they're worse girls than we are, because throwing like a girl oftentimes means throwing better than a boy, right?
Yeah.
But I will also say that I've heard now a couple of times that the guys are so dramatic, right? And there's a joke that says, you know, I can't remember it exactly, but it's something about a man having a cold is like the end of the world, right? Everything's a problem. Whereas somebody was saying, I've seen women bleeding. I think Karen was saying soccer players bleeding on the field and they're still playing. So, you know, Rebecca and then Emily again.
I don't watch sports. I watch sports hardly ever, but I think this says something about how okay as a society we are with men expressing emotion. We have like maybe like 2 times where you can have a man express emotion like other than happiness or anger. So I think that's why you see that in sports. Like, oh, this is our thing. Of course we're going to be upset about blah, blah, blah.
All right, I think that's a very interesting perspective. Thank you, Rebecca. Emily, did you want to say something again?
Kind of going back to how, like, you know, the soccer players are bleeding, or like the girl soccer players aren't as dramatic as the boys, or even in any sport. There was a study done that shows that women can actually tolerate more pain than men. So I think that's probably part of the reason. That's
probably why we have the children?
Yeah. And like, we don't cry when we have the children.
Very interesting. Well, Edwin, I want to ask one more question about this. Could it be that the American women's soccer team is not as well known because it's soccer?
Yeah, soccer's not like, I mean, it's growing in the U.S., but it's not like, and it's like.
So I think there's 2 hidden things, is kind of what I'm getting at, right?
I've never watched a soccer game, and I've watched like basketball, football, stuff like that. I don't know, just
interesting.
Soccer's only popular when the World Cup comes out.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, right now in the world, right now they're playing like even my little sister, like she plays soccer, right? And then you know everyone's playing soccer, so it's just, you know, I think it's getting built up.
Oh, definitely.
For sure.
So.
But even in South America, when I was growing up, where, as you all know, soccer is king, right? Girls didn't play soccer. We played volleyball. The only time we got near a soccer team is if we were the Madrina. Right? You guys know what I'm talking about. We'd carry the roses and walk in front of the soccer team. You didn't play. And that's just, you know, maybe 2 generations before you. I don't know how that generation thing works. But very interesting. Thank you, Edwin. I thought that was a very good one. All right, ladies, it looks like we have time for maybe 2 more, but certainly one. Who's going to step up? Oh, come on, it's going so well. Tam, go.
All right, Pam. Maybe you want to help her. Yeah, Meg's point about soccer to me is really important because there's this term that Susan Rahman introduced me to. Has anyone taken a class with Susan Rahman? Yeah, intersectionality. So the women's soccer team is fighting two battles. Sexism, because they're women, and soccer, because soccer's not that popular in America. In Hidden Figures, the two battles they're fighting are they're women, so they're facing sexism, and they're African Americans, so they're facing racism. So think about that term of intersectionality. It's like you're at the intersection of being a woman and being a soccer player, or like maybe you're an African American and you're gay, or you can fill in the blanks. But that's an important topic to think about.
It is indeed. All righty.
All right. So when you think about baseball, like being integrated, we think of Jackie Robinson. We don't really think about how it started. Was there like protester? It just kind of, in our eyes, just kind of existed in our history, but we don't know why it went about. The person who pretty much responsible for that was Jorge Pasquale. He was a business owner who owned the largest, the biggest export-import of business in Mexico, and he was also one of the main sponsors for the Mexican League during the 30s. It was the late 30s, he started recruiting a lot of black players from the Negro League. Matter of fact, he recruited almost over 150 black players, and 14 of them actually were in the Hall of Fame now. The players really enjoyed playing for Mexico because their treatment was better, the salary was better, and then it was getting, Mexican baseball starting to get a little bit more noticed and get more popular, and then there was a gentleman, Monte Irwin, who was a San Francisco Giants retiree. His number was retired. He was part of the 54 World Series quoted. It was the first time in my life I felt free. You could go anywhere you wanted, eat anywhere you wanted, do anything you wanted, and not have to worry about anything. You just had a wonderful time, and I owe that experience to Jorge Pasquale. So it was getting a lot of popularity, and then Pasquale decided to recruit white players. So he recruited about 27 white players from the Major League Baseball here in the U.S. And he even sent a blank contract to the big name players like Ted Williams. So pretty much saying, hey, you decide how much you want to get paid and how you want this deal to work out to play in Mexico. Major League Field started a little threatened. So 1947, that's when they started integrating black players into their league. So that's why I believe he's the hidden figure, because I didn't know who he was until I saw a little Facebook clip. I'm like, who is this guy? Why is he so important to Major League Baseball? And since we're doing this project here in class, I decided to look him up. And
super interesting. You guys all know who Jackie Robinson is, right? Mm-hmm. And Branch Rickey. I always thought Branch Rickey just did this out of the goodness of his heart and was the right thinking kind of guy. Sure, he's going to make some money on it as well, right? But I find it fascinating that the reason this came about is because white players were starting to go down to the Mexican leagues and taking away from the MLB. I think that's really, really interesting. Any questions for Tam? No? All right, Tam. Yeah, yes.
Who were some of like the big name players? But
I only grabbed Ted Williams. There's a couple other guys.
Ted Williams?
Yeah.
Jeez.
He even sent a contract to Babe Ruth. I mean, I've researched that down. I don't know how reliable that source is. But
for you.
He been trying to recruit Jackie Robinson, but they never commented or replied. And I think the league started to change now because I meant Phil to mention this. So some of those white players that went to south of the border, so Major League, before they started recruiting, they're like, hey, you guys can keep playing for that league, we'll blacklist you from MLB. So a good amount of them started heading back because they weren't sure if Mexican league gonna last for a long time, and they probably weren't sure if they want to stay there
forever to play in Mexico, whatever the reason is.
I'm also interested in the aspect that I know that there are some Latin American countries where baseball is popular, but I've never thought of Mexico as a Latin American country where baseball is popular. I never realized they had leagues. Is it?
No,
Interesting.
not really.
A little bit? Is there actually a league down there?
Where I'm from, no.
Interesting.
Where I'm from, it's more soccer and bull riding.
I had never heard of somebody who shared my last name, even more. Very exciting. All right, thank you very much. Okay, kiddies, so, as you can see, don't start packing up yet, damn it. As you can see, we didn't all get through. I didn't get a chance to hear from all of you. So, everybody's gonna send me their notes, okay? And I would very much like to hear from everybody still, even if we just do it in class on Monday, just to see what everybody came up with, because these are super interesting. And I'm really curious to see what everybody else has. Before I let you go, I'm reminding you that your paper is due on Tuesday, okay?